Dr. Mary, as an expert in the field of mind-body healing, can you explain how so many of our ailments can be linked to our mind and how our mind can be used to reduce our sufferings?
That's a really great question. I'm going to again refer to the fact that the mind and the body are not separate. And I think we need to use this as the basis for understanding to any mind-body phenomenon, mind-body healing, any thinking that we do about the mind-body. So if I had a word that adequately integrated mind-body as one word, that's what I would use. So pretend like there's no hyphen, that mind-body is all one word, and that will simplify the entire conversation. So one of the things I noticed when I did primary care as an internal medicine physician is that so many of the things that caused ill health in people had to do with the choices that they made in their life. And I'm big on education, so I spent a lot of time helping individuals understand what the right rules of the game were, what they could do to be healthier, and so on and so forth. And sometimes that was enough, and it really made a difference. It's not that I'm against medication. I think that the medicines and advances of our modern science have a place. But I also am aware that over 80%, roughly 85%, it's estimated, of the illnesses that humans suffer from in these days have to do with lifestyle choices. If anything, we suffer from diseases of excess. Well, what I discovered, in particular when I started being curious about what was fueling obesity as being such a problem, because as you well know, obesity surpassed smoking as the number one cause for preventable illness. I started to look more closely at what is this about? I mean, yes, we have a lot of fast food. We have a lot of empty calories that are available, and studies that actually have looked at social studies that have looked at the amount of advertising that goes into different kinds of food clearly show a delineation of an inverse relationship between the nutritive value of a food and the amount of advertising that is done. So we have a lot of different forces acting on the human psyche to make poor choices. But more importantly, what I grew to discover is that the kinds of things that motivated people to, in this one example, overeat, often had to do with a profound emptiness that had nothing to do with the need for food itself. So that's one minor example. So the choices that we make are nested in an internal matrix of decision-making. That decision-making process happens in the mind. So in a very, very brief kind of rapid synopsis here, I'm going to bore down into the concept of the mind itself and what that has to do with health. Very specifically, just to kind of pull out and keep on the back shelf, is the recognition that all of our behaviors come from some sort of mental process. And so unless we look at the mental processes at play, we cannot understand why our behaviors are as they are, in particular when those behaviors have proven themselves again and again and again to be maladaptive and very directly related to poor health. So if we look at the mental processes in a kind of a bored down fashion, we can see that we have layers of belief that we operate from. Now, I have a lot to say about this, and I'm going to try to keep my examples very simple. But understanding that every example that I share is applicable across the board for every single behavior that we engage in particular those that we don't understand. So let's say, for example, that there is a dog running down the street barking. And we have a belief structure embedded in our brain that instantly equates barking dog with a dangerous situation. And I'm not even going to talk about why in this moment. I'll get to that in a minute. But because of that, we go into a high adrenaline state. Okay, now here's layer one. Our entire chemical milieu responds to the beliefs that we have. More specifically, it responds to events that happen in our world as we perceive them through the filter of the beliefs that we have. So if we see running, barking dog, and we have a belief structure that in very simplified form states, barking dog is a dangerous situation, I might be harmed. Our entire body responds to that in a state of panic, fear, adrenaline rush. And animals, this is a great example actually, animals are great at picking up our belief structures as they act out that have nothing to do with the words that we say. So in this case, let's presume this is in fact a somewhat aggressive dog. It's been trained to chase running creatures. Let's just say that, even though most dogs are not in that category in this case, let's say. Now, if I had a belief structure that had no fear of dogs, I would behave in a certain way and the dog would recognize me as a human with whom it responds in a certain way. But in this case, very specifically, because my belief structure programs me for fear and to turn and run and panic, the dog, in fact, may chase after me. Now, this example is real life. I know of a woman who was hospitalized in intensive care unit because, and I won't mention the breed of dog because I don't want to give any particular breed a bad rap, but this particular breed of dog is known to be attack animals. In fact, 2 of them did attack her and mutilated her. And she had a lot of fear about dogs. So this is one very simple, very profound example. Now, our entire life, our entire day-to-day existence is filled with the equivalent of barking dogs. And we have a whole set of beliefs that equate to the entire infrastructure of how we see and respond to the world. And for all of us, we have some places where different items, things that we perceive, provoke fear and provoke a whole series of behavior that are maladaptive simply because we've turned off our ability to see objectively, you might say, if there is such a thing, because that particular belief filters what we see in a particular maladaptive, fearful way. Other things will provoke anger. Other things provoke a sense of profound emptiness, loneliness, sadness, grief, feeling abandoned. I'm going to go back to the dog example. In this particular case, and again, this is a real-life example, a young boy was bitten severely when he was a young 3-year-old, I think. When he was playing, he approached rapidly a strange dog who, of course, reacted and bit him. And he was a boy who actually was very excited and loved dogs. From that moment forward, he turned inward and developed a completely different relationship in his little 3-year-old mind about dogs. And, of course, because of exactly the phenomenon I'm talking about, he played it out again and again. So dogs tended to bite him. It was quite astonishing. This is a real story. And so, wouldn't you know it, he became a postal worker with the reputation that postal workers have with their association with dogs, and in fact it was a big problem for him. So that's one real-life example. Whatever our personal story is, whatever our personal history is, we develop in our mind, brain pan, ideas about the world. And everything we do in association with the world plays that out. So we prove it to ourselves again and again. The thing that I discovered in teaching mindful eating classes is that the majority of the individuals who took the classes had some variation of a story that left them anxious or empty or frustrated, and their first recourse of response to those internal sensations was to eat. So incorporated in their belief structure was that food is an antidote. Food, perhaps in their childhood, was the one place where there was love, or there was quiet, or there was happiness. Or in counterpoint, the dinner table might have been a place of terrific conflict. So when they felt conflicted, they would mindlessly eat just to fill the hole. So, there are any number of variations on this. Your own mind can probably think of a number of examples. And what's important here in mind-body healing, mind-body health, looking at that entire spectrum of how our mind affects our health, it's important to wake up to the associations that we have going on in our mind. Most of the time, these are really unconscious. And see how this situation, this environment, this internal sensation provokes this series of behaviors that are maladaptive and, in fact, cause greater harm. I have shared this story before. I'll share it again because it instantly comes to mind. I, in my primary care practice, had a patient who had relatively newly diagnosed diabetes type 2. Now, theoretically, particularly early on, this could be remediated with a change in diet and exercise and so on. And so I sent her to a nutritionist to get educated. And month after month, she would come in and her situation was not changing. In fact, I had to add another medication to her regimen. She was very frustrated. She so much wanted to be off of medicine. So I sent her to the nutritionist again, just in case she'd missed something. Well, actually, she knew all the answers. She was a really smart woman and so on. But the third visit, I got really curious, and I realized there was something going on here, because this really should be responding better. The sugars were getting worse, not better. So we sat down, we had a deeper conversation, and she had a belief system that only certain foods were affordable. And because her husband was temporarily out of work and she was having trouble making ends meet, in spite of what she knew, she continued to buy the same things that she had always bought, which tended to be high glycemic index items, not so healthy, cheap. So, as I have mentioned, her husband, I then brought her husband in for a visit and put him in charge of shopping. and within 6 months, her entire sugar had changed. Her blood sugar had changed, and she was able to get off of all medications except for an occasional metformin. So that's another real-life example of how belief structures play out in how we behave in life, and it has a direct impact on our body. Now, in another conversation, we might go more deeply into the actual physiology. Our chemical hormones, our inner chemistry changes. As I mentioned in the first example with the barking dog, it instantly changes our entire chemistry. It will change our blood pressure, our pulse rate, and so on and so forth. So, as you can see, just with these very few examples, that once you start exploring in this world of the mind-body influence, it's nearly infinite. It becomes a lifelong curiosity. If I'm doing such and such, become curious. Become curious. This is not about punishment. It's not about blame. It's not about making yourself wrong. None of those things. In fact, frankly, that has a deleterious effect on your internal chemistry. So that's going the wrong direction. But if you are doing something that is harmful and you know it, become curious. Become very curious about, what is going on in my mind? What am I thinking? What precedes? Back up and look at, what was I thinking? What are my beliefs? Try to find those beliefs, because beliefs start to feel like concrete, like they're unchangeable. But beliefs are thoughts. They're just a combination, a conglomerate of thoughts. And they are absolutely changeable. As soon as you can catch them, the vision is over half of the formula for making change. Finding that which motivates you to do harmful things is exactly what the remedy is. And that's why I've devoted my life now to this branch of medicine that I call Mindbody Healing. Thanks for the question.